Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. I love to see a lot of people interested in how to write reliable Selenium tests, so I will just jump into my talk. And a little bit about me. I've been doing testing for 10 years already, and the last 5 or so I've spent doing automation with mostly Selenium. At least in the last 2 or so years, I've been mostly focused on Selenium. And I tweet, I travel, I do a lot of things. I also have a GitHub project where I'm trying to share code with other people. I'm trying to share the things that I've learned myself from other people who have helped me throughout my career. So you can just check all those things out. And I will just jump into the reason that we're here. So writing Selenium tests. Many people say that they really, maybe they don't like Selenium that much because their tests are flaky, their tests randomly fail, and so on. But from my experience, you can get over that by using something that's implemented in Selenium, which is called WebDriverWait. Who here has been using WebDriverWait? Just so I get a, okay. Many of you, okay, good. So what's the biggest issue or the most common issue that we have with our tests? It's all about timing, right? So we want to interact with our page, we want to click on something, we want to write something inside some fields, we want to check for some element attributes and so on. But when we're trying to do that, the page is not always ready for us to interact with it. We're just doing it too fast for the page because modern pages are all about Ajax and other things that happen on the front end. So we need to time our interaction with the page so that we don't have any invalid failures. And by invalid failures, I mean those failures that occur when the application itself is working properly, is just that you didn't interact with it when you were supposed to, when it was ready for you. This usually leads to a lot of retries in your tests, which just take more time out of the test run, and it's really ugly to see a lot of retries in your tests. So before I even get to the WebDriver part, I have to mention something that is very, very important. No method, no approach will help you do reliable tests if you don't really understand what your software does. So there are many instances where, let's say that we take a very simple example, that you have something that's disabled on your page. Your UI developers can make a button be disabled in several ways. So either that they put some random or some specific attribute on that element, or they're doing something else. The important thing is that when you're trying to check that the element is disabled, you understand how that's going to be achieved by the developers. So you need to have a feeling of what the developers meant for your page to do, okay? And once we are familiar with our pages and we know what we want to do, we can use the WebDriverWait to have reliable tests. Now, so that we are all on the same page, I will just go a little bit over what WebDriverWait does. So basically, when you write a wait in Selenium, you have to specify a timeout. So the timeout is this one here. This means if you're creating a specific wait method, how long do you want to wait for something to happen on the front end? Which is the maximum amount of time you want to spend waiting for a condition to happen? And then you will just have to specify, what the condition that you're waiting for is there. So basically, when you want to write a wait method and you can write custom waits for all kinds of events, you just have to specify these two things. What is the timeout that you want to wait for? And what is it that you want to wait for? How this works is that you will wait for up to the specified timeout for the condition to happen, right? And every half a second, your wait method will go and check for that condition that you specified, right? Every half a second, you just go and you check, is this happening, is this happening, is this happening? If it's happening during the specified timeout interval, your method will just be successful and your test will just carry on running. So you have seen that the condition is happening and you will just continue with your test. If it doesn't happen within the specified timeout, so let's say that you're waiting for an element to be displayed for 30 seconds, if it's not going to be displayed within that 30 seconds, your test will fail. And it's very important to notice that it's going to fail with a timeout exception. So whenever you are going to use waits and you will see timeout exception, that means that you've waited for the specified amount, but the condition didn't happen for some reason. And I will go through a lot of examples of what you can wait for and how you can create specific waits for those and how to write your test using those weights to have a string, let's say, of weights that will make your test reliable. First of all, what is the benefit of using a weight? Well, it makes sure that if your tests are supposed to pass, because your application is working fine, you don't have any bugs, they will pass. There is a higher chance of your tests passing simply because you will wait for something to happen instead of just putting an assertion and for that assertion to take place at the wrong time. So you're making the tests wait for something that you know is supposed to happen there. This will give you more confidence in your tests, and you will have no need for any hard weights. You're not going to use sleep in your tests at all if you're using this approach. So what can we wait for? What can we wait for? Give me some examples. What do you wait for in your tests? Visible? Clickable. OK. Well, stale. That's a very tricky one. Stale is so annoying. Well, yeah. Been there. So I'm going to show you what I wait for in my tests, and these are just some of the few things. You can wait for almost everything that happens on the page, and that almost everything includes URLs. Some URLs, like you're doing something, you're clicking on a button, and you're waiting for a specific URL to load in your browser. You're waiting for a URL to contain certain keywords or to not contain certain keywords. Like maybe you don't want to end up on a page that says error in the URL, right? You can wait for element attributes. You can wait for element attributes are something like a class or, well, the ID is another attribute, or some custom attributes that you have in your page that describe that something has happened on that page by means of specifying that attribute. You can wait for an element text to equal, to contain, to not equal, to not contain, to start with, but to ignore the case, because maybe you have a page that says login with capital letters or with smaller letters. Depends on how the implementation is done. You can wait for, of course, page to load, so for the page to finish loading before you do anything, for a dropdown to be populated, or for the element to be, as some of you already mentioned, visible, clickable, and checked. So you can wait for a bunch of things. The only thing is that you need to know what you want to wait for. You need to look at your page, and you need to understand, OK, what are the steps that I'm trying to do in this application, and to try to design those steps by using waits instead of saying like element.click, and element.click and then thread sleep or assert equals or something like that. I will show you some examples of what I normally do and some trickier examples that I've ran across. For me, my design considerations are something like I have a dedicated class, let's call it a waiter class, in which I store all my custom wait methods. So I know that I have a class in which I will find all the wait methods that I'm going to need in all my tests. Whenever I encounter something that I need to add to my waits, I will do them by adding them into my waiter class. And in that waiter class, I will specify a timeout constant, so that when I will call the waits from the wait class, I don't need to specify the timeout for each test. I have a default value, which is usually 30 seconds in a test environment. So I will wait normally for up to 30 seconds for something to happen on the page. If you're thinking about running the same test in production, 30 seconds might be a lot. But sometimes it's OK to have a higher value just to make sure that your tests are passing and that you don't have any invalid failures. Also, if you're thinking about this timeout value, you might think, OK, 30 seconds might be a bit too much in production. So you can start tweaking that. You can start trying with different values for the timeout to see, like in production, if you're waiting for 30 seconds for everything to happen, that will mean that you probably have an issue with the pages in production, right? Nobody wants to wait for 30 seconds for a button to be displayed. Like if you're the customer, you don't want to wait for up to 30 seconds. So in production, you might want some lower values. Once you define the timeout constant, as I said, when you create specified wait methods, you don't need to specify the timeout also. But you can create custom versions of the same methods in which you will pass a timeout, because in some cases you just need a specific timeout for something. And before I show you the examples, there is one thing that I find that people are not using enough, and something that I really enjoy. When you're using waits, what happens is you perform some actions. Like in the old approach, you would perform the action, you would do a thread sleep, and then you would say assert equals the element text is something, or assert true the element was displayed, or something like that. But if you're using wait, there is no more need to do the assertion. Because when you're waiting for something to happen, it's like saying, oh, I've waited, and now it's happened, so now assert true that that has happened. So this will actually remove some of the lines of code that you will write in your test. There's no need for all your assertions. Some of them you will still need, because there are some checks that are not included in your waits. But if you're waiting for the button to be displayed, once the wait has finished successfully, that means that the button was displayed. So there's no need to say, assert true the button was displayed, because you already know that it has, right? Unless you had a timeout exception, which means it wasn't. So that's like the failure part of the assertion that you would normally use. Okay. So what would like a real example of a wait method that you would use in your tests? This is a more it's complicated because there are many things that you pass to this method. These are all Java, by the way, but I guess it's similar in other languages too. So this example refers to waiting for the element attribute to equal a string. And everything I do here is just do the wait. So I have the timeout here. In this test, I actually specify the timeout value. And then I wait until, and this is the condition that I'm waiting for, an element that I'm passing into the method. So this can be used across several tests. So I will pass in different elements that I'm interacting with. And by elements, I mean web elements, which are the representation of the things that you see on the page, right? I'm going to wait until the element, what did I do? Until the attribute, which I again specify here, of an element equals an expected string. So what would an example of me calling this method would be, I'm waiting for the class on a button to be disabled. So its value to be disabled. So then I will pass in the element, which is going to be button something, the attribute, which is going to be class as a string, and then what I expect to see in that attribute, which is disabled in this case. So I'm going to say my button's class is disabled, so it has the value disabled. So this is how I'm going to write the element attribute equals. If I want to change it to something like contains, I just have to do another method that instead of, I love that button, instead of equals here is going to say contain. So this is how I'm going to write my custom wait methods. And this is the way I can write custom methods for element text, element attribute, and so on. Similar to this, it's just 2 lines of code. And the only thing is that I'm going to specify as many parameters as I need in order to get to that condition. Some examples. What is the most frequent thing that we do when we write automated tests with Selenium? We open the pages, right? Because we want to do something on a page. So we're using driver.get. And then in the old approach, we would use the sleep afterwards, right? This is bad. And why is it bad? Because we have the hard-coded timeout there. So we're always waiting for 5 seconds in this case. And the page might not load in 5 seconds. It might load in 10. And it's really difficult. Even if it loads in 1 second, then you are, here, you will definitely wait for those 5 seconds, which is 4 seconds too much, which will take up from your test run time. And this is bad. So what we can do is we can write a custom wait for the page to load. So if we rewrite the initial code that we had here, we can say driver.get the URL, and then we can say waiter, which is my wait class, waiter.wait for page load complete. This is better. So basically now we're waiting for something to happen, but it's still not the best thing because we have 2 lines of code. So remember these 2 lines of code. I'll show you what that matters in a second. First, what is this page load method for me? It usually just executes this JavaScript that says, return true when the document ready state is complete. So this is what I use across all my tests, and this is something that has worked for me for ages. This is my wait for the page to load complete method. So once we have this, as I said, we can replace the driver.get and sleep with the driver.get and waiter.wait for page. But let's say that you have 1,000 tests in which you open a page, or you have 1,000 times when you open the page. Each time you will open the page, you will need to also wait for it to load, which means each time you're going to write a driver.get, you will have to write a waiter.waitForPageLoad. And that means 2,000 lines of code, right? That's 1,000 too many. So what I usually do, and what I've done in all my examples, is that I will write a custom method, which is going to be called get. So you're kind of overwriting the get method from Selenium. And what this get does is just get the URL and then wait for the page to load complete. So you're just writing a very small method that calls driver.get, and then it calls the waitForPageLoad. And this way, you get to this simpler version where you're just saying waiter.get URL. And whenever you want to open a page, you're not going to go to driver.get anymore. You're going to go to the waiter.get. And this way, you will never forget to wait for the page to load once you open it. And it's going to be shorter, right? So you're going to write just one line of code instead of writing 2 lines of code each time you want to open a page. It's smaller. And it's more efficient because you're always going to wait for that page to be fully available to you. So this is nice. This is a very simple thing. You're just opening a page and waiting for it to load. What happens when you have something more complex? Like, you need to fill in, let's say that we're talking about a registration form. You need to submit, or you need to put in all your personal details there, like your first name, last name, email address, and so on. Then you need to submit the form. And let's say that you want to check that the submission was successful. So you put in valid data, and you want to see a success message which is not on the same page. So it's going to redirect you somewhere. Now, in many cases, this redirect is not going to happen from the first page where you put in all the data to the success message page. Sometimes you will go through some redirects that are not very obvious to you. You will not see them in the browser unless you're probably running in a test environment. That's going to happen really, really fast. The redirects or the URLs will change from the first one to a second one, a third one, and then to the final one. But you won't really see it with your eyes because in the browser it's going to be too fast. So what would a test for this look like? Like the classic version of the test would be something like perform some actions, write the information in the form, click on the button, sleep, and then check for something, do more actions. This might work actually. So sometimes this might work. If the redirect is fast enough, you will get to the final page right in time, and you can check for the message on that page. But what if you want to use the wait? Something that I've seen many people do is something like, so you're performing the actions, you're clicking, and then you're waiting for the page to load fully. This doesn't work if you're going through these invisible redirects that I mentioned, because waitForPageLoad complete is going to wait for the first page after you clicked on the button to load. And that first page is not going to be the page that you expect it to be, but it's going to be the first redirect page that you don't really see. So if you're doing it like this, after you're waiting for the page load to complete, you're going to do something else. You're going to check for a message. But you will be checking it on the wrong page, right? Does it make sense? Sometimes the redirect will be really, really fast, and this will work. But if you're doing it in a test environment, most definitely it will not. And you're going to think, like, what is happening? I waited for the page. I need to check the message. I see the message because when you're looking at the test, you already see the message. But in fact, your checks were not done on the correct page. So in this case, you're not going to use waitForPageLoad complete. You're going to use waitForURL. So this is one of the situations when you know that you need to be on a specific URL and check for the message that you want to check for on that page. Once you are on the correct page, then you can check for whatever you want to check. So this is better, right? So we have something like perform an action, click on something, wait for the URL, and continue with your tests. Again, whatever I'm showing you like in yellow here can also be improved. So it's a good thing, but it can be improved. And we'll get back to it a bit later. What is this wait? Well, in my case, the wait is just wait until the driver.getCurrentURL, which is from Selenium, equals the expected URL. And then I'm just waiting also, I'm doing a call to the waitForPageLoad complete to make sure that the page also loaded. So it's not just that I'm on the correct URL, but I also wait for the page to fully load before I can check anything on it, right? Make sense? Yeah, OK. Good. So this is how I solve the issue with waiting for specific URLs. Does anybody know this, but the element is there syndrome? Thank you. So what happens? You're looking at the page while your tests are running, and you're like, why didn't I click on that button? Because I see that the button is there. Like if I do it manually, I can click on the button, but my tests simply will not click on it. And you can throw all kinds of exceptions. I just looked these up. These are all in, like, I looked in Selenium to see all of the exceptions that I can get. Usually I get the stale one and the no such element. So what do you do when you want to, for example, click on the button and it's not yet available for you? What I do is I create my own click method in the waiter class. So in my waiter class, I will have something that simply does the following. Again, I define the timeout up to which I want to wait. And then I'm going to do a try catch. Try element click. Now, if I manage to click on the element, then I'm going to return true. And the wait will say, uh-oh, it's true. Then, OK, I managed to click on it. I'm exiting the wait. I'm continuing with the rest of my test. If, for whatever reason, for whatever exception, I did not manage to click on this element, I will be here. And I'm going to return false. And my wait method is going to say, uh-oh, false. So I didn't manage to click on the element. And I'm going to try it again. Whoops. Go back up. Try element click. Did I manage this time? No. I'm doing it false again. I'm waiting again. Oops. Go back. This is going to repeat itself until I will actually manage to bypass any kind of exception that the page will throw at me, and until I actually manage to click on that element. Again, it might be that you're trying to click on something, but you're on the wrong page. So this will definitely fail in that case, right? You need to be on the page where you know for sure that that element that you're trying to click on will appear at one time or that it will be available. For example, sometimes you will see that the button is there, but there will be an invisible overlay that needs to disappear before you can actually interact with the button. So you're just going to wait for it to become available, and once it is, click on it, and then move forward with the rest of your test. In physics, we have something that is called action and reaction, which says something like an action triggers a reaction. Click is the same thing. When you're clicking on something, you're triggering something else. So when you're clicking on a button, you could have new elements displayed on the page. You can have some elements that are disappearing from the page. The same page refreshes. You're redirected to another URL. So many things, right? So why not make your click methods a bit more useful and design something like click and wait? Okay? Click and wait. So let's just have a simple example. Let's say that you need to click on a button, and then you need to check that the text on an element is something that you're waiting for. The old approach would be, button.click, thread sleep, and then assert equals that the element text is something. You can do an enhancement on that. You can use button.click or the new waiter.click for that button, and you can use the waiter.wait for the element text equals. So you can do a combination of two. However, in your test, you will have many, many times when you need to say, click on the button and then wait for a text of another element or of the same element to equal something. So if you're going to do this a lot of times, also makes sense to create another custom wait for this. And the custom wait will do nothing but, you will just have, instead of saying button click and wait for the element equals, you can just say waiter.click on something and wait for an element text to equal something. And this way you save lines of code. You don't have to write so many lines of code. This means that, first of all, you can just say inside the method, first of all, waiter.click, which says, I'm going to wait until that button is clickable, which means the click is now reliable, but I also will wait until the element text equals something. So you're going to do two waits. It's a succession of waits, but both of them will lead to a valid state. You're going to wait for the button to be clickable. It's not going to throw an exception. You're not going to use the assert, so you will move on from that step. And then you are going to wait for the reaction to happen, right? You're waiting for the action to be possible, and you're waiting for the reaction to happen. And this is how you will design more reliable tests. Remember when I was talking about the redirect issue, when you're waiting for a specific URL, and I said something like you're doing a button.click, and then you're doing a waiter.wait for a specific URL. If you're thinking about click and wait, you can actually combine the two. You can create your own custom click and wait for URL method that will click on the element and also wait for another URL. And this, again, will save you time. The whole thing is that you need to stuff a lot of waits in your tests. The more waits, the better. Waits mean that you are waiting for something to happen, and you only carry on with the rest of your test when that condition has been fulfilled. And in this case, if we're talking about the registration page, fill in the data on the page, click on the registration button, wait for the URL, and then do something else. And the clicking on the button and the wait for URL is just this line of code, just this. And again, this will help you because it's going to be used in several other tests that you will have. And there will be many occasions when you can use this, and you just call the waiter method, and that's that. Okay? Another example. Let's say that you want to open a page, the first page that you open. And the old test would look something like you're waiting for 5 seconds. You do an assert true that, that a button, let's say, is displayed. So you assert that the first element is displayed. Then you click on it. Then you sleep again because you kind of want to wait for a second element to be displayed. Now, the first thing that's wrong with this is that this assert is not needed there. So I've seen a lot of tests where people do assert something, and then they're interacting with that element. You don't need that. If you're going to click on it anyway, you don't need to do the assertion that it's there, because if you want to click on it and it's not there, it will throw an exception anyway. So no need for the extra assert true that the element is there. No need for that. What else can we improve about this? Well, we want to get rid of the sleeps. So what we are going to do is just do this. The second or the left column is what a bad test would look like, which means open a URL, sleep, click on the first button, sleep, and check for the second button. The right-hand side, which is only composed of waits, says get the URL. So open the URL, or open the URL, wait for the page to load, and then wait for the element to be displayed. Once this completes successfully, then you can just click on it and wait for another element to be displayed. So this is a succession of waits. I've opened the page, I waited for the button to be there. Once it was there, I clicked on it. Click again is going to wait for it to actually be available, to be really, really clickable. And then I'm just waiting for another element to be displayed, which is kind of like my final assertion of the test that says, I need for that second element to be there. Does that make sense? It's a bit more fuzzy right now, I know, but the thing is, try not to think about driver.click and driver.get and so on. Try to think about waiting for whatever you need to wait in your tests to make them reliable. In this case, what you had to do was to open a URL, and you just wanted to click on a button to see that another button was there. This way that I'm showing you is just opening the page, making sure that the first interaction of the test has happened, because it can take a second, it can take 10 seconds, and there's no need to have your test fail here, when you could have just waited a little longer in order to get to your successful state, which is here. This is an example of the worst wait that I had to ever write. There was one particular dropdown in all of the sites that I was testing, just the one dropdown, which was behaving nuts. So whenever you want to select from a dropdown, first you need to do in Selenium, you need to do a select new select. So you need to create a select object. Then you need to select by value in my case. So I needed to select something from the dropdown. Let's say it was the name of a car. And then I needed to do a check, because I noticed that not all the time when I was selecting from the dropdown, that value was actually selected. So sometimes the test would just say, OK, I selected or went by, and actually nothing was in the dropdown. So I needed to create the worst and most custom wait for that. Also, sometimes this line would throw a stale element exception. Sometimes. Sometimes the first line would work, but then the second one would throw the same stale element exception. And sometimes, as I said, the value was not the expected one. So I had to create this horrible wait method just to make sure I can select from the dropdown. So I did something like, try to do this. Try to create a new select. If this fails, I'm catching a stale element exception here, and I'm going to say false. So I wasn't able to select from the dropdown, which means I'm going to do the wait again. Poof, I'm starting from the beginning. I'm trying again, select new select. If this works, that's fine. I'm going to go to the second line. I'm going to try to select the value from the dropdown. If it doesn't work, if it's going to throw me that stale element exception again, I'm going right back here, I'm saying false, and I'm going to do it again. Again, until this is not stale anymore, this is not stale anymore, and I actually managed to select the correct value from the dropdown. Sometimes, even if I bypassed the whole stale, I had to do like 3 tries to select something from the dropdown because it wasn't selecting it properly. So I had to like force it to select what I wanted to select from it. So this is like the largest, some code was omitted here, but this was like the largest, most painful wait that I had to do. But in the end, after writing this, I actually managed to resolve that problem, and I had a test that passed each time I ran it. Okay, so depending on the situation, depending on what you have to do on your front end, you can write your custom waits for everything that happens there, everything that you see that is unreliable, or that if you run the same test 3 times, you see that it fails randomly because of timing issues. You can create custom waits for basically anything. And like the whole idea of this talk and like the summary of this talk is like, don't necessarily use driver.get or element.click. Create your custom waits for whatever you need. Create like the get methods, create get and something, create click and something, click and wait for something in order to have reliable tests. You can just have a succession of waits, and that's how you're going to make your tests reliable. Also, I don't have time to go over this, but very important, when you have the wait methods and you're passing in the web elements, always pass them as page object properties. Never pass them as driver.findElement, because that is not going to work. If you want to know more, you just ask me after the talk, okay? And my final slide is that if you want to check for some of the custom waits that I was talking about, I created this very small library. It's not yet full, but I have a lot of waits there. You can just take a look at that, you copy-paste some of that into your project, or if you want to help add more waits, you can just DM me on Twitter. I'm a little tester. So I hope this helps, and I hope you're going to have more reliable tests in the future. Thank you.
So we have time for a couple of questions. Is that okay?
Yeah, 2 minutes.
Questions, question.
Hey, Corina, have you tried doing any of this with the loadable component on the page objects?
No. So
there's an isLoaded method that you can apply on overrides on page objects, where you could put a lot of this logic and have it self-contained within your page object.
No, I haven't.
Okay.
Anybody else? Any questions?
Don't be shy.
There you go. I'm gonna pass this down. Thanks.
Do you have any suggestions for waiting until page scrolling completes, like browser completes, scrolling or animations?
So, like when you're scrolling, you still need to check for something, right? You need to scroll until you encounter something. Like I actually have that case in my test. So what I'm doing is like a custom scroll. I keep scrolling for a little bit. Like I need to get to a certain element on the page, right? So I'm going to do try, scroll, and I'm going to specify the amount that I want to scroll, which is like, let's say, this much on the page. Then I'm going to see whether that element is displayed. If it is, that I'm going to return true from the wait method. That means I found it, so I can stop scrolling. Otherwise, if I haven't found it, I'm going to say something like, try element is displayed. If it's not, throw false. And if this is false, then I will again scroll with the next amount. So I've already been like here on the page, and the next iteration of the wait is going to take me a bit lower. And then I can check again for the same condition. And again lower until I actually see that element there.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.